From the nation's capital in Washington, D.C., Call on Congress. The program discussing national issues that affect Oklahoma. Your host, U.S. Representative Tom Cole.
Thank you for joining me today for another episode of Cole on Congress. Today we're pleased to have a new member of the 113th Congress representing the 8th District of California, Congressman Paul Cook. His background shows, frankly, true patriotism through love of our great nation and commitment to public service through community involvement. He's a retired colonel and Vietnam War veteran, United States Marines, tremendous military service to our country. 26 years. We're certainly happy to have you weighing in on those issues here, but you also had another career in public service after your Marine Corps career. You've got a PhD in history. You have served in the California legislature, so it's an extraordinary background, an amazing breadth of experience you bring.
Well, I don't know. I think it shows I couldn't hold a job down in one place. So I had multiple adventures, I guess you could say.
Well, tell me first, let's talk a little bit about that background, because I think it really is extraordinary, Paul. And, the first time I had the opportunity to meet you, your friend and my former colleague, and I think really one of the great guys in this House, Jerry Lewis, who was for many years chairman of the Appropriations Committee, former conference chairman for the Republican Party, gave me a call, and he said, you got to meet this guy. This guy is running, and it's in one of these seats that we're probably going to win, but he's in a primary, and it's really important that we get somebody like this into the Congress of the United States. And he immediately threw out, and by the way, he knows a lot about Indians, and he's interested in Indians too, and he's a Marine. And I thought, boy, that's pretty special. And so tell me, what got you into the Marines?
Well, when I was younger, I was kind of an athlete, everything like that, and I wanted to kind of break away from the family a little bit. I'm actually from the Northeast. And so the Marine Corps kind of appealed to me. I had a couple of role models in the family that were in the military. And I decided, we might as well go in there and see what happens. And it's a decision I never regretted, although there were a few times in Vietnam where as an infantry officer, as a grunt, it really got a little difficult, to say the least. And spent 26 years, got a chance to travel, but more than that, you got a chance to interface with the young Marines, the young men and women. To be very candid with you, to be in combat with them, which is it's an experience unless it's hard to describe sometimes. But even to this day, you still remember their names, particularly the ones that were killed. And you remember when it happened, where it happened. So, had a great career, and ironically enough, I was on the East Coast most of my time, and my monitor was going to send me to a real bad place, headquarters Marine Corps, Washington D.C. And I said, "Oh, don't send me there." And they sent me out to the middle of the Mojave Desert and retired there, and ended up in Congress, and after going to school and blah 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 blah. So. A very strange career.
Okay, well, after the Marines, you said you took some time, went to school. What'd you do?
I did. I had the GI Bill, but I had time. And I had a basic history degree, education, and things of that nature. And I said, the skills that I have, I still felt, I was physically in good shape. Mm-hmm. Mentally, that's arguably another story. But I said, I want to go back to school. I was more interested in football and stuff like that. So I said, let's try it. And went back and I wanted to get involved in policy decisions and things like that. I thought about being a public administrator, and I got a master's in public administration at the Cal State system in California. And then went to the University of California system, University of California, Riverside. And I actually had a double major for a while. They said, Cook, you got to pick political science or history, and your Russian isn't very, very good. You better be a political scientist. And so stayed in that, and then, gradually you start teaching a little bit, and I felt I was very good at it. I like it's kind of like being back in the Marine Corps. You've been with the young troops, and you have a chance to make an impression on it, to be a mentor. And you've been down that road before.
Yeah, no, I love it.
Yeah, I do too. So as opposed to when I was 18 years old, I actually opened up some books. I actually read them, studied. It was like, wow. And I think part of it, or a large part, was because of the Marine Corps, because it taught that self-discipline and that dedication. Enjoyed it. Next thing you know, I'm on the local town council, and mayor, council member, 8 years.
What got you to do that?
Well, there were some issues. People wanted to see if I could help them. It's always local issues. It's about your roads are not being paved, or taxes, or things like that. And local government, I really enjoyed that, because that's probably the closest touch point that you have to the people there. I always give the analogy where you're in your local grocery store, and here's this lady with her buggy or shopping cart, and she's lining you up, and there's sights there, and it means, what did I do wrong this week? And they're going to tell you right away, and you better do something about it, because they're not going to go away. So that was 8 years, and I had a very good friend on the council, a very young man by the name of Chad Mays. And Chad talked me into running for the State House in California, State Assembly, and I haven't forgiven him yet, but that was quite a leap in the largest state, and you go up there and you have a different perspective on what government is all about. So that, and of course I never really thought about Congress, ironically enough, but Jerry Lewis was such a great role model, and even to this day, everybody just talks about Jerry Lewis was a class act, and you try to emulate somebody like that.
Yeah.
He would talk to everybody, Democrat, Republican, and he got things done. And I'm kind of, at this stage of my life, hey, let's just get some things done. That's what I came here for. And so I think I had a great role model, and your help when I came in here, I couldn't even find my way to the restroom, and still can't. And it's been a learning experience, and at my age when you come here, but it's been exciting, very, very frustrating, and one which you have to evaluate every day on where you're going.
Let's talk a little bit about you, because you're on some important committees. Obviously, you live in my district with Tinker Air Force Base and Fort Sill Army Post, and lots of Guard and Reserve units and components and armories, that sort of stuff. Obviously the House Armed Services Committee, pretty important place. I sat there 6 years myself before I went over to appropriations, so I could get to defense appropriations where I am now. So tell me what you're working on there, because you clearly bring a lot more than just a district perspective, or I'm here to look after my bases. I mean, you're here to look after men and women in uniform. You've been one of them, and how's that going? What are you focused on there?
Well, I was very happy with my committees. Obviously, the House Armed Services, I felt like I knew something about it instead of walking in cold. And to this day, how sometimes the staff writes up the questions. And I'm going to ask my own questions.
Yeah.
And if I don't know, anyway. And I got veterans. I was chair of the Veterans Committee and Foreign Affairs. So I think I have a little bit of insight. I certainly don't know everything, and I'm constantly reading. And it's been a long time since I retired from the Marine Corps, and it changed. And they're not using muskets anymore. It's a modern day Marine Corps. So we have the shutdown going on, and right now I have a bill. It's 3232, and we passed that initial fix there to make sure that we take care of the armed forces. The problem reading it is it didn't go far enough, and it was open to interpretation. Many years ago when I was a young second lieutenant, the only thing I understood was that infantry platoon and everything. It's much more complex. And you have to remember, we're still at war. We got 60,000 troops in Afghanistan. We have a huge infrastructure. and everything that supports that. And since the years when I first came in the Marine Corps, the Army, Navy, what have you, have all been more and more civilianized, which is a good thing because you have people that, and it's a bad thing when you get deployed like 7 or 8 times because they can go back and forth. The point I'm making is the armed forces is very complex. It goes all the way down into the weeds. So you have, we have a great cadre of civilians, of military technicians that support that organization. And if you just say, well, we're just going to take care of the troops at the top, which is, 1,000% behind that, you've got to make sure you get the rest of those cadres and everything else that support that.
Well, my dad was a career military. He was in the United States Air Force for 20 years, and then the next 20 years he was a civilian defense worker at Tinker. And he used to say he was career non-com. He was actually, I think, the second most senior master sergeant in the Air Force when he retired out because he joined the old Army Air Corps. And it turned down OCS like 3 times. He said, I didn't want to be an officer. I wanted to be one of the guys running the Air Force. And he said, they all look like master sergeants to me. But the point was, he said, I spent 40 years one way or the other, working to defend the United States of America. And I'm not sure the last 20 weren't more important than the first 20 in some ways. And your appreciation for what it means. Again, my district, we have 15,000 men and women, civilian defense workers at Tinker alone, another 4,000 to 6,000 at Fort Sill. But those are men and women that keep 50-year-old KC-135s flying in combat conditions, and they tend to the AWAC fleet is based out of there. It's actually the most complex base in the Air Force in terms of the number of missions, engine repair, B-1 bombers, B-52s, all of them roll through there for overhaul, maintenance, upgrades, you name it. So it's a pretty amazing place, and the idea you could support the Air Force by just helping the men and women in uniform, but not having the people there that are making sure that the stuff we're putting them in is top-notch and running and overhauled and up to date. You're not doing anybody a favor if you're sending them out with a weapon system that doesn't work.
Well, you're absolutely right, and you've got to do it right, and that is the corporate memory, and I think we're and a large percentage of the civilians are, retired military.
Yeah, huge percentage of places like Tinker and Fort Sill.
And the reason is they had that expertise on doing that. And so I think this is very, very important that we include them and get them back in there. The original bill that was passed also overlooked the reserve establishment in terms of that same thing, the ones who were the all week and everything. The reserve establishment is even more complex, where you're going to go from, maybe a weekend a month to full active duty and making that transfer. But a lot of people forget that all the operational commitments now, as opposed to 50 years ago, the reserves are written in everything. I mean, they've had more deployments, just about every unit. They've done an absolutely great job.
Yeah.
And if we're going to have all these military contingencies, if we're going to have 60,000 troops in Afghanistan, if we're going to bring back $22 billion worth of gear in the next year from Afghanistan, which the taxpayers want a return on their investment so we don't have to spend it all over again, I think we've got to think smart and take care of particularly, we've got to have that support system as long as we've got young men and.
Which subcommittees on defense are you on?
I'm on air and land, and I'm on naval systems, submarines, and things of that nature.
Those are really important subcommittees.
It's great. I've been out to the Truman. I've been on a submarine, and I hit my head a couple of times.
You're pretty big for a submarine guy.
Well, the big submarines are just huge,
yeah.
And I still managed to do that. The aircraft carrier, it was like being back there years ago, where everything is made out of steel, and you're bumping into this. But it was great, and just to see the carrier landings. But the training and everything else. I'm worried about readiness. I'm worried about I talk to the Army a lot. You got Fort Sill, and you just don't go out there and stop training, firing artillery missions or combined arms exercise or flight. and we've cut a lot of the training hours and everything else. So I think we've got to be very careful right now.
General Odierno made that point, the Chief of Staff of the Army, in Defense Subcommittee, and he was very blunt, talking about sequester and what that had done in terms of training hours. And he said, obviously, the people that we know are in rotation to go to Afghanistan, or they're getting training. They're getting what they need, but nobody else is. So if we have a contingency any place in the world, obviously we'll go, but we're going to go with people that we haven't got to the peak readiness that they need to be. And he said, I'll just be honest with you, that's going to cost lives.
Yeah.
That is, these decisions have enormous consequences. I know you're aware of what sequester has done or is doing to the military. What do you see looking down the road if we don't find a way to restore some of that funding?
Well, I know the military, and I've gone down this path before, the post-Vietnam era, where you didn't have training, you didn't have, couldn't even get ammunition, couldn't get scheduling, and the readiness in those days, it was terrible. And it's like, here's history again. If you don't understand history, it's bound to repeat itself. The same thing is happening. Units are going to be C4, which is not combat ready, not deployable, and I think anyone in a position of authority are saying, you cannot talk about, we're going to support our treaty obligations, we're going to do this, we're going in Syria, we're going to do this, without looking at the readiness, the national security. I think we're in danger. We're on some very, very dangerous ground. If you're going to have these commitments, which we do, and I think you should have them, but you've got to look at the weapon systems, the people, everything else, the training. And right now, because of the sequester, I agree with the general 100%. It is not good. And obviously, since I'm in that particular, the one area of expertise I think I have, I'm going to be a strong advocate for, obviously, the military. But national security, this is more than just one individual service.
You also sit, and there's so many things I could get your view on. You also sit, obviously, on foreign affairs, and national security is intricately involved in that. Just in a global sense, I mean, what do you see the role that we're playing overseas, and how, are we in a sustainable position? How would you describe where the United States is in terms of its relationships with other countries and where it ought to be going?
Well, it changes almost overnight. I think you're a historian, and for years we always had everyone bought in the fact that the Nazis and fascism were the enemy. And then it was communism and the post-World War II and the Cold War and everything else. And I think a lot of people, maybe they don't want to recognize, or sometimes I think the contingency's over. And I'm talking about global terrorism. Mm-hmm. This is something that is not going to go away. And you have more, and just when you deal with it in one particular country, or not even a country, an area, it pops up somewhere else because of a lot of, we are always going to be the target. And because of some of the allies that we made, obviously being allied with Israel, being allied with our traditional allies like the UK and Great Britain has always been with us. But so you're going to have these religious differences between the Middle East and Christianity and Judaism, and some of these are going to be the reasons for these altercations, but these are ways that certain groups, many of them are small, because they can get funding from different sources. They can get some sophisticated weapon systems, or they can get some cheap weapon systems. My big fear is not that they're going to have nuclear weapons, but they're going to have chemical weapons, that they're going to mix it up, and maybe I'm exaggerating a little bit, but you look at Syria, you look at what happened in Iraq, and the number of times that chemical weapons and biologicals have been used. I tell you, I've been to war, I've been wounded, and the one thing that used to always scare me was some of these agents that they have out there, and I'm talking about things that are worse than sarin, I'm talking about VX, they're just absolutely horrific. And civilians, I worry, I'm fine, but my wife, my kids, my grandkids, everybody is vulnerable. And you cannot just crawl in a hole and say, not my problem. The world has changed, and you've got to be ready for that.
So you'd be pretty skeptical of an isolationist foreign policy.
I think it's being stupid. I really do. You cannot ignore the facts, and particularly after 9/11, where and you're going to have more and more. You just had the obviously in Boston and more, and there's somebody out there right now that probably, and you would think that after Osama bin Laden was taken care of, that this would go down, and quite the contrary. The world is a much more dangerous place than when I was fighting in Vietnam, and I think in the next 10, 15 years it's going to be even more dangerous. And I think that whether you like it or not, national security, our primary obligation, is to protect our citizens.
Well, you also sit on veterans, and so you're in charge of helping take care of the people that have done the hard things that we ask them to do and stood between us and some of the bad things that can happen around the world. So tell me what your concerns and focus is there.
Well, I was chairman of the Veterans Committee, and I'm you hear the
in the
words.
California legislature.
Yeah, I'm sorry, and I'm too junior to be chair of anything.
That'll change.
You look at me and say he's junior, but I ran the Veterans Committee there, and you come in and you hear some of the things, and we've had so many people that are deployed, and they come back, and we send people off to war, we separate them from their family, all kinds of problems. I'm sorry, but we have an obligation to take care of them. And we're not doing a very good job. And the VA comes in there. And, I know everybody's got problems. And I'm just very, very impatient. And sometimes I say to myself, I got to make sure I don't drink any coffee before I go on a committee, because I get lit up a little bit about, I don't want to hear that, well, it takes 2 years to train one of our specialists in dealing with some of these case issues. And I said, 2 years or a year and a half or something like, wait a minute, boot camp is 10 weeks and you send somebody off to go to war, and we've got to make sure that we take care of it. And I'm probably being much too impatient.
I don't think you are, and because this is one that is mystifying, because Congress has been willing to put the resources here. We about doubled the budget for veterans when Bush was president, and we've increased it 50 or 60% since the president's been on a bipartisan basis. Congress has been willing to vote the money that they're asked to vote, and if anything, add to it. I don't think that's a budget that ever gets cut when an administration submits it. Obviously, people look and try to make sure what you're doing is efficient, or maybe there's better ways to spend what you've asked for. But I don't. It's not one of these budgets where they come in high and they have to settle for less than they asked for. So given that, and given the fact that we've been doing it now, because I do think it was very underfunded at the beginning of Bush's term, and you can see there's more people using VA facilities now. That's actually partly because the quality has risen and there's better access. Yeah. You're going to draw in more of that population, and so you're always running a little bit. But I'm still surprised after all that, and we're a decade into regular increases in VA funding. And decade plus, really, and we got 2-year backlogs on cases, where folks come out with problems and they're just not being dealt with rapidly enough.
Yeah, and it's getting more and more attention, and it's not just the VA's problem. I think DOD is, whether they like it or not, they got to exchange information. DD 214s, the document that you have when you get out of the service, is very, very important. And but I think the culture has got to change a little bit, and you get some old war horses like me on some of these committees, and I get very impatient. I told the secretary, I said, look, I'm a Vietnam veteran, and I said I can't.
As is he. He's a very good man.
He is.
In fact, he served the country with great distinction.
Really great, and here's a colonel talking to a four-star general.
Probably always your dream when you were in the Marine Corps.
Well, I don't know about that. But I told him that, and I basically said the same thing. That it was kind of like two people that have been to war together, and I said, where I'm coming from is, I'm getting a little long in the tooth. And I said, I talked to a lot of the Vietnam veterans, and they have the perception, it's not necessarily reality, but they have the perception that the VA is kind of waiting for them to die. That, if I hate to sound like an insurance agent, but the tables that in the next 5 years, maybe half of them are going to be dead, and 10 years, the majority. And I said they're trying to work out their claims and everything like that. And so, I kind of obviously feel their pain, and because I've gone to war with that generation. So I'm probably a little bit different than some of the younger ones. And it's kind of like the World War II and the Korean and all those other ones. We're always...
I think, too, what people miss sometime in this, and I want to get you to reflect on your story, but look, I grew up in a military household, and then my dad was a retiree, and if you look at the number of our men and women in uniform that have grown up in military households, it's a disproportionate share of those who serve. And if they hear mom and dad talking about the unfulfilled commitments that were made to them or the poor service they're getting, I mean, taking care of your veterans is part of recruiting the new force. Yeah. People need to know, if they go in, that the promises are made are going to be kept. So, I think it's intricately bound up with the well-being of the existing force and the replenishment of it. So.
Yeah, and it's, as you were saying, that ethic, that culture, and it's the same thing. It reflects in those bills that I pass. And, I'm worried about one thing, and I'll be very vocal about it. I learned a long time ago. I was the most dangerous weapon in the world. I was a second lieutenant with a map and a compass. I did learn that, the one thing you have, particularly when you go into battle or whatever, you've got a responsibility to take care of those troops. And that hasn't changed. I still have that mission. And whether it's my constituents or the veterans or the military or what have you, that's why dealing with the government shutdown, it's very, very frustrating. I didn't come to, I don't do many TV shows. Who wants to cook on a TV show other than you? And I was very honored to be here. But that is not my goal to be on, and I guess I should be in it. But my goal is to actually try and get some things done in the area that I know something about, and one of 435. And hey, I'm going to go back up that hill again, and if I get a bloody nose, then so be it.
Well, we're almost out of time, but we're very lucky to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
No, I mean that in Congress. I think your passion, your background, your mission, particularly in a era when we've deployed so many, and so many have come home and faced challenging situations when they return, knowing that they've got an advocate like you, both in uniform and in their status as veterans. I think that's a pretty good thing. It speaks well of you. It speaks well of your constituency, and you bring a great deal of honor and distinction to Congress. So,
well, thank you, and appreciate your comments. Of course, your dad. I always learn one thing, and that is that you listen to your NCOs, particularly because they know far more than you will ever know. We'll
end on that note. Hey, Paul, thanks a lot. I really appreciate you doing this.
Thanks.